The air in my kitchen, a space that had served as the undisputed heart and soul of my life for over 4 decades, was thick with the rich, comforting scent of roasted turkey, the aromatic warmth of sage, and the spicy perfume of my famous apple pie. It was a scent that, for me, was far more than just a fragrance. It was a potent time machine, capable of transporting me back to countless Thanksgivings past. I, Eleanor Vance, a woman of 74 years, had spent the last 3 days immersed in a meticulous, loving ritual of preparation. My hands, though marked with the elegant lines of age and experience, moved with a practiced grace that completely belied my years. The rhythmic kneading of the dough, the careful folding of the linen napkins, the precise placement of each piece of china on the old mahogany table, each action was a cherished memory, a silent testament to a life well lived. I was making my grandmother's cornbread dressing, a recipe passed down through 3 generations, each ingredient a whisper from the past, each step a sacred ritual. My late husband, Robert, bless his soul, used to say that this dressing was the only thing on earth that could make him believe in miracles. Since his passing 3 years ago, these traditions have become more than just cooking. They are my way of keeping his memory alive, of clinging to the warmth of a family that once was, and that I so desperately wanted to remain. This year, Thanksgiving carried a weight far heavier than any holiday before. My son, David, had grown distant, a chasm of silence and unspoken disapproval growing wider with each passing year. His wife, Sarah, a woman who prized sleek, modern aesthetics and detached efficiency above all else, had made it abundantly clear that she viewed my home, my traditions, and indeed, my entire way of life, as archaic and cumbersome. Her world was one of glass and steel, of minimalist design and detached efficiency, a world where the soulful warmth of a handmade meal was a foreign concept to be politely endured rather than truly enjoyed. She preferred store-bought simplicity and the clean lines of corporate culture to the vibrant, chaotic, and loving complexity of my kitchen. But I was determined to bridge that gap. I had extended an invitation to David, Sarah, and their 2 children, Lily and Mark, my only grandchildren, my precious legacy. I had also invited a handful of neighbors, widows and widowers like myself, who sought solace in shared company and genuine human connection. I wanted to fill this house with laughter and love, just as Robert and I always had, to remind David of the roots that had nurtured him, of the unwavering love that had built this home and this family from nothing. I was in the midst of folding the last of the linen napkins, each one a silent testament to 1,000 shared meals, when the doorbell rang. The sound, once so familiar and welcoming, now held a slightly unsettling quality, a prelude to a confrontation I could feel coming. My heart, a loyal but weary metronome, quickened its pace with a mix of anticipation and a profound sense of dread. It was them. My sweet granddaughter, Lily, now 17 and on the cusp of womanhood, burst in first, her honey blonde hair a chaotic halo of curls. Her smile was a small, shy thing, a fleeting flicker of the warmth I remembered from her childhood. My grandson, Mark, 22 and a recent college graduate, followed, his eyes fixed on his phone, the universal symbol of modern disconnection and self-absorption. He was a handsome young man, but his face held a kind of guarded neutrality that felt less like a shield and more like a wall. David and Sarah entered last. David, my boy, my handsome boy, was now a man of 48 whose face seemed perpetually etched with the worries of his new, high-powered corporate life. His shoulders were always tense, his gaze always a little too distant. He seemed to have forgotten how to simply exist, how to simply be in a room without calculating its strategic value. Sarah, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a perpetual expression of polite, almost clinical, disapproval, carried a gleaming white box, a store-bought dessert from a trendy, overpriced bakery. It was a silent, yet potent rebuke to the labor of love that had filled my kitchen for days. "Mom," David said, his voice as flat and emotionless as the polished floor beneath him, "the house smells nostalgic." The word nostalgic hung in the air like a critique, a polite, yet pointed way of calling my home old, dusty, and utterly out of touch with their world. I chose to ignore the subtle sting, to smile and open my arms, pulling them all into a hug that was met with varying degrees of awkwardness. I could feel the tension in David's rigid posture, the way Sarah held herself slightly apart from my embrace. "I have made all your favorites," I said, my voice filled with a desperate, hopeful cheerfulness that I did not truly feel. The turkey, the dressing, the pies, everything. I ushered them into the dining room, a room that had witnessed the quiet, joyful ebb and flow of a lifetime of family gatherings. The table was a masterpiece of tradition, a testament to my love, set with Robert's best china, polished to a shine that reflected the golden glow of the chandelier. The turkey sat proudly in the center, a golden, glistening monument to my efforts, surrounded by a dozen side dishes, each a recipe from my past, each a story in itself. It was a feast fit for a king, or at least for the family I had given my life to. The early part of the meal was a strained affair, a performance of polite disinterest. David and Sarah spoke of their new, exciting lives, of corporate mergers and stock portfolios, of parties with important people whose names meant nothing to me. They talked about their recent trip to Europe, a whirlwind of five-star hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants, all the while picking at the food I had so lovingly prepared, as if it were a foreign substance. My cornbread dressing, the miracle food, sat on their plates, barely touched. The neighbors, bless their hearts, were more appreciative, but their gratitude only served to highlight the indifference of my own family. Lily and Mark were quiet, picking at their food as well. Mark, when I asked about his plans after graduation, simply shrugged. "We will see," he said, and went back to his phone. Lily, when I asked about her dance classes, offered a simple "it is fine," her eyes carefully avoiding mine. My attempts to bridge the gap, to reconnect with the people I loved most in the world, felt like a series of discarded offerings. The love I had poured into that meal felt like a discarded offering, a gesture no one wanted or understood. The conversation, if one could call it that, eventually drifted to the one topic I had been dreading all day: my finances. David, with the air of a benevolent dictator, started to talk about the rising costs of property taxes and the burdens of home maintenance. "Mom, this house is a huge responsibility," he said, pushing his chair back and letting out a long, theatrical sigh. His voice took on a tone of patronizing authority, a tone that sent a chill down my spine and made my blood run cold. "It is simply too much for you to maintain. And, well, with all due respect, you are not getting any younger. We think it is time to be practical." My stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. I knew what was coming. I had felt it building all day, a storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that was about to break right over my head. He was about to deliver a blow, a strike of reason that would cut deeper than any insult, any dismissive word. "We have spoken with a realtor," he continued, as if he were discussing the weather. "The market is good right now. We can get a decent price. Sarah has already looked into some lovely assisted living facilities. They have activities, nurses on staff, everything you could possibly need." Sarah, with a serene, almost unnerving smile, chimed in, "It will be so much easier for everyone, Eleanor. You will not have to worry about a thing. Think of it as a fresh start, a new chapter." A burden. The word was not a question, but a statement, an indictment of my very existence. The festive hum in my ears died down, replaced by a roaring silence. My vision blurred, and the turkey on the table, once a symbol of love and family, now looked like a grotesque monument to my failure. A burden? I looked at the walls of the home I had nurtured for decades, every nook and cranny holding a memory of a lifetime of sacrifices. I looked at the faces of my grandchildren, their expressions distant and unreadable. I looked at my son, my boy, whose face now held a cold, calculating resolve that I had never seen before. It was a face that was a stranger to me, a face that saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle to be moved. "Worry about a thing?" I repeated, my voice a barely audible whisper. The disbelief and pain were so profound that I could not find the air in my lungs to scream, to rage, to fight back. "This is my home. This is the home I shared with your father. This is the home where you grew up, David." "Things change, Mom," he said, standing up and grabbing his coat, his body language a physical manifestation of his finality, his eagerness to be gone. "It is time to be practical. It is time for you to face reality." He turned to his wife. "Sarah, let's go. We have a long drive ahead." Lily and Mark stood up silently, their faces unreadable. Mark avoided my gaze entirely, his focus still on his phone, as if the conversation had not even happened. Lily, my sweet Lily, gave me a fleeting look of what I could only describe as pity. Pity. Not outrage, not empathy, not love. Pity. The look of a person who thinks you are too old and helpless to understand what is happening, and is already mourning the loss of a person who is still very much alive. They were gone in a flash, leaving me alone in the silent, empty house. The untouched Thanksgiving feast stared back at me, a monument to my misplaced love and a testament to the brutal way it had been rejected. The warmth and joy I had so desperately tried to create had been brutally extinguished by 2 words: "You are a burden." I walked into the living room, a room filled with photos of a family that now felt like a fiction, a performance I had been too naive to see through. There was a photo of a young David, his face covered in cornbread dressing on his 4th birthday, a photo of Robert and me on our wedding day, a photo of Lily and Mark as children, their faces full of unbridled joy. I looked at the faces, and I felt a profound sense of loss. It was not just the loss of my home, or the loss of my independence, but the loss of a family I believed in, a family I had given my entire life to. As the sun set, casting long, mournful shadows across the room, I sat down and began to cry. I cried for Robert, for the life we had built, and for a love that had been repaid with cruelty and disdain. The quiet darkness of the house enveloped me, and I was left with a cold, hollow feeling, a feeling that I was truly and utterly alone. The weight of their words was a physical pain in my chest, a cold, hard stone that had replaced the warmth of my heart. I was a burden on my own son, a burden on the family I had loved and cherished above all else. And in their eyes, there was no redemption for that. The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief, a succession of cold, empty mornings and silent, lonely nights that stretched on forever. David's words, "You are a burden," had not been a simple remark. They were a surgical strike, a weaponized phrase that echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart, a constant, painful refrain that kept me awake at night. My home, once my sanctuary and the living embodiment of my life's work, had been transformed into a battleground where I was being systematically and emotionally evicted by my own flesh and blood. Every room, every object, every memory was now tinged with the bitterness of betrayal. The very air felt heavy with the weight of my impending loss, a suffocating presence that followed me from room to room. The campaign of emotional warfare began subtly, but with a relentless precision that chilled me to the bone. David and Sarah's phone calls, which had once been infrequent and perfunctory, now became a daily occurrence, each one a fresh assault on my dignity and autonomy. They were dripping with a patronizing concern that was far more insidious than outright anger. "Mom, you need to sign the papers for the realtor," David would say, his voice a dispassionate, corporate monotone that made it clear this was a transaction, not a conversation. "This is for your own good. It is so you will not have to worry about anything anymore. We have your best interests at heart." He would often use the phrase, "your best interests," as a shield, a way to deflect any genuine emotion or protest from me. He would present their selfish motives as selfless acts of kindness, and I was expected to be grateful. When I refused, his tone would shift, becoming more insistent, more accusatory. "Mom, you are not thinking clearly. This house is a huge responsibility. It is too much for an old woman to manage. You do not want to be a burden, do you?" He would always land on that word, burden, like a seasoned swordsman delivering a final, lethal blow. It was his weapon of choice, and he wielded it with surgical precision, each repetition a fresh cut to my soul. He was not just trying to convince me, he was trying to break me. Sarah would follow up with texts, her messages as bright and sterile as the assisted living facilities she was so eager for me to move into. They were filled with photos of brightly lit common rooms, smiling nurses, and lists of activities that felt like a mockery of my full, vibrant life. "Look, Eleanor," she wrote in one message, "a community room. You will love making new friends. You will not have to be so lonely." The implication was clear. My life, as it was a pathetic, lonely existence that needed to be managed and remade by them. Loneliness. That was their narrative, their assumption. The fact was, I was not lonely. My life, though quieter since Robert's passing, was full and rich with purpose. My garden, a riot of roses and fragrant herbs, was my sanctuary, a place of peace and quiet contemplation. My weekly card game with my friends from the Bridge Club, the same friends I had known for 30 years, was a source of endless laughter and companionship. My volunteer work at the local library, a place where I felt valued and needed, gave me purpose beyond the four walls of my house. These were things that nourished my spirit, things they had no interest in, and therefore, things that in their world did not exist. They were erasing my life, piece by piece, and replacing it with a narrative of my frailty, my incompetence, and my isolation. They wanted me to believe I was a victim of my age, so I would surrender to their will, to their plans, to their greed. The pressure mounted, escalating with a ruthless efficiency that left me breathless. David began to control my finances, claiming he was helping me manage them. He told me he was moving all my accounts to an online system that was more secure, but in reality, it was a move to limit my access to my own money. He would call and ask me to approve transactions, but the way he spoke, it was clear he was not asking for my permission, but simply informing me of his decisions. When I protested, when I tried to ask a question about what he was doing, he would cut me off, telling me that I was being irrational, that my generation did not understand the internet, and that I was at risk of being scammed by shady characters online. My autonomy, a hard-won prize from a lifetime of careful management, was slipping through my fingers, each day a new humiliation, a new battle I was losing. My home was becoming a trap, and my freedom was being systematically stripped away, one phone call, one text message, one condescending comment at a time. The woman who had been fiercely independent her entire life was being reduced to a helpless child, all under the guise of protection. One afternoon, a cold, gray day that mirrored the state of my soul, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Eleanor, my neighbor of 30 years. She had lived next door since Robert and I had first moved in, and she had seen our children grow up, our family flourish, and our lives intertwine with hers. She was a fiery, no-nonsense woman with a heart of gold, a woman who had no tolerance for pretense or cruelty. Her lips were pursed in a thin line, and her eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were filled with a deep, warm concern that felt alien to me now. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a low growl of disapproval, "I heard about what is happening." How did you hear?" I asked, my voice trembling, a fragile thing I could barely control. The shame of it all, of my son broadcasting my personal struggles, was a physical pain. "David called me," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "He told me not to worry if I saw a for sale sign soon. He said you were struggling and that he was moving you somewhere you would be safer." "Safer?" "My Eleanor, you're the most resilient woman I know. I saw you fix that roof after that winter storm when Robert was in the hospital, and you didn't even have a ladder. You used a rope and a lawn chair." Her words were a lifeline in a turbulent sea. She saw me. She saw the woman I was, the woman who had faced life's challenges with a fierce determination, not the frail, incompetent old woman David and Sarah were trying to invent. "It is all so awful," I whispered, the dam of my composure finally breaking. I told her everything. The Thanksgiving dinner, the gaslighting, the forced control of my finances, the relentless pressure to sign away my home. I spoke of the shame and the grief, the feeling of being a helpless, unimportant person, a burden to the very people I had given my life to. I told her how I felt like I was losing my mind, how their constant barrage of condescension was making me doubt my own sanity. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression a mixture of profound sadness and righteous fury. They are trying to erase you, honey. They want you to believe that you are nothing without them so that you will go along with their plans. They are not protecting you, they are stealing your life from you. They have not seen you as a person, but as a resource to be exploited, and now that they think that resource is in decline, they want to cut their losses. Her words, so simple yet so profound, hit me like a revelation. She was right. I was not helpless. I was not a victim. I was the matriarch of this family, the woman who had held it all together through thick and thin, the woman who had built this home from the ground up, brick by brick, memory by memory. I had lived a life of dignity and purpose. I was not ready to surrender that, not to David, not to Sarah, not to anyone. That night, as I lay in bed, the familiar scent of old lavender and Robert's lingering cologne filling the air, I thought about Robert. I thought about our life together, our shared dreams, and our secret plan for old age. We had been so careful. We had anticipated that our children, in their own way, might one day see us as a burden, as an inconvenience. We had planned for it. We had opened a separate savings account, a secret fund to ensure our independence, should we ever need it. I had forgotten about it, lost in the routine of widowhood, but now, the memory came rushing back to me, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. David and Sarah could not know about it. We had been very careful. It was an account I had opened under a different name, a different bank, a separate life. The knowledge of that account, of that secret plan, filled me with a sudden, powerful sense of purpose. It was a lifeline that Robert, in his wisdom and foresight, had given me. I felt a surge of strength, a fiery defiance that had lain dormant for too long. I was not a burden. I was a force to be reckoned with. The fight for my home, for my life, for my dignity was not over. It was only just beginning. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the cold, hard certainty of a woman who knows what she has to do. I had been underestimated for the last time. My family had miscalculated. They had seen an old woman, frail and alone, but they had not seen the fire that still burned inside me, a fire that was about to incinerate their carefully laid plans. They had tried to erase me, but I was about to remind them in the most powerful way possible that I was still here and I was still in control. The for sale sign appeared on my lawn a week later, a stark, white monument to my impending loss and a public declaration of my son and daughter-in-law's intentions. David and Sarah had moved with a chilling efficiency, convinced that my defiance was nothing more than a momentary fit of senility, an old woman's desperate grasp at a life she could no longer manage. A parade of strangers, led by a pushy, overly enthusiastic realtor named Brenda, began marching through my house, a steady stream of curious eyes that judged my life's work, my home, with a cold, professional detachment. I watched them, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. They looked at my antique furniture, pieces that had been in our family for generations, and called it dated. They looked at my thriving garden, a testament to decades of patient care, and said it was too much work. They looked at my memories and saw only a potential profit, a blank canvas upon which they could paint their own, more modern lives. The humiliation was unbearable. David and Sarah insisted I stay in the house during the showings. "You have to be here, Mom, to answer any questions," David insisted, but I knew the real reason. They wanted me to be a prop in their little play, to look pathetic, to seem like a helpless old woman being rescued from her own life. Sarah would stand beside me, her hand lightly on my arm, her touch as cold and clinical as a surgeon's. "Poor Eleanor," she would say to potential buyers with a saccharine smile, "she just cannot manage anymore. We are doing this for her own good." I felt my spirit shrinking under the weight of their condescension, but the fiery defiance that Eleanor's words had ignited in me never fully extinguished. It smoldered, a small ember in the darkness, waiting for its chance to ignite. My days were filled with a gnawing sense of helplessness, but my nights were spent in quiet contemplation. I revisited my memories of Robert, of our shared dreams and our secret plan. I knew I had to act, and I had to do so with a resolve that would leave no room for doubt. My anger, once a raw, unrefined emotion, had now been honed into a razor-sharp instrument of purpose. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in my study, a room filled with Robert's old books, a place that felt like his last, lingering embrace, when David and Sarah entered without knocking. They were holding a pile of legal documents, their faces a mixture of predatory glee and triumph. "Mom," David said, his voice flat and businesslike, "we need you to sign these papers. They are just the final transfer of the title. The new owners have already put in an offer. The closing is next week." My blood ran cold. They were not even waiting for me to agree. They were simply presenting me with a fait accompli. They were stealing my life from me, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a pen. Sarah placed a pen in my hand. "It is for the best, Eleanor," she said, her voice an oily balm meant to soothe a panicked mind. "Think of all the free time you will have. No more responsibilities. You will be so much happier." My hand trembled. The pen felt like a weapon I was being forced to use against myself, a signature that would obliterate my past and condemn my future. The thought of signing away my life, my memories, my home, was a pain so sharp it took my breath away. But then, in the silence of that study, my gaze fell upon a photograph of Robert and me on our 30th wedding anniversary. We were standing in front of this very house, our faces full of hope and happiness. I saw the pride in Robert's eyes, a pride not just for the home, but for the life we had built together, a life of independence and dignity. I remembered his last words to me, spoken on his deathbed: "Be strong, my love. Do not let anyone take your power from you." In that moment, the smoldering ember within me burst into a raging fire. I was not a victim. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had weathered storms, raised a son, and built a life of her own making. I would not surrender. I dropped the pen on the table with a clatter, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the room. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice low and steady, a voice I had not heard in years. David's face flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What did you say, Mom? Are you losing your mind? This is a legal document." I said, I repeated, standing up and looking him straight in the eyes. "I am not signing anything. This is my home. This is my life. You have no right to take it from me." Sarah laughed, a high, brittle sound that was full of contempt. "Do not be ridiculous, Eleanor. You are not thinking straight. You are old and confused." "I have never been more clear-headed in my life," I said, my eyes now a burning point of fury. "And I have something I think you should see." I walked over to the old mahogany desk in the corner of the study and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, in a small, weathered leather box, was a key. A key to a safe deposit box. A key to the secret Robert and I had kept for so many years. The look on David and Sarah's faces, a mixture of confusion and shock, was a small but potent victory. They had thought they had all the power, all the control. But they were wrong. They had been playing a game of chess with a queen who they assumed was a mere pawn, and they had just discovered that she had a secret weapon they had not even known existed. The fight was not over. It was about to begin. The final act was just a phone call away. The open house was a week later, a beautiful, sun-drenched Saturday afternoon that felt wholly out of place with the storm that was brewing inside me. David and Sarah had gone ahead with their plans, convinced that my defiance was nothing more than a momentary fit of senility, a fleeting, irrational outburst they could easily ignore. The house was spotless, stripped of my personal touches, and filled with the sterile, soulless decor of a professional stager. My memories had been replaced by generic art and beige throw pillows. Every corner of my home, once a repository of a lifetime of love, now felt cold and foreign. I stood in the corner of my living room, the one where Robert and I had danced to our favorite old records, and watched as people walked through my life, pointing and whispering. David and Sarah were in their element, playing the role of the dutiful, concerned children. David, in a crisp suit, held court with the realtor, his voice a smooth, confident drone. Sarah, dressed in a tasteful black dress, offered cookies to prospective buyers, her smile as bright and fake as a new dollar coin. They were a perfect portrait of an empathetic, selfless couple, but the facade was so thin that I could see the greed shining through their eyes, a hunger for what they believed was rightfully theirs. Then, the doorbell rang. It was not a prospective buyer. It was a lawyer, a tall, imposing man in a pinstriped suit, and he was accompanied by a young woman with a briefcase and a stern expression. My heart, which had been pounding a steady rhythm of fear for weeks, now began to beat with a quiet, fierce joy. I knew the man. He was Mr. Harrison, our family lawyer for decades, a man who had helped Robert and I with every legal document in our lives. The young woman was his junior associate, Mary. David saw them, and his face hardened into a mask of irritation, his confident demeanor cracking. He walked over, a polite but firm smile on his face. "Mr. Harrison, what a surprise. What are you doing here? We have no business for you here." "I am here on Mrs. Vance's behalf," Mr. Harrison said, his voice as calm and steady as a ship's anchor. "She has requested my presence. And she has some things to say." I walked to the center of the room, my head held high. The noise in the room, the polite chatter and the whispers, died down. All eyes were on me. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice clear and strong, a voice that had not trembled in weeks. "David and Sarah here have told you that this house is for sale because I am too old and frail to take care of it. They have told you that I am a burden on them and that they are doing this for my own good." I paused, letting my words sink in, letting the weight of their deception fill the room. The silence was deafening. "They are wrong," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "This house is not for sale. I am not a burden, and my family has no right to take away my home." David's face was now a mask of pure rage, a shocking display of his true nature. "Mom, what are you doing? This is humiliating." "Humiliation is something I learned from you, David," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. "And I am not finished." I nodded at Mr. Harrison. He walked over to a small table in the corner, placed the briefcase on it, and opened it. He pulled out 2 large manila envelopes. "The first envelope," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, "contains the new, legally binding will of Eleanor Vance. The second contains the deed to a new home she has recently purchased, with funds from an account that was unknown to her son." The room erupted in whispers. David and Sarah looked as if they had been struck by lightning. I then began to tell them the story of Robert and me, the story of our secret account, and how we had built a financial safety net to ensure we would never be a burden to anyone. I told them about how David had taken control of my finances, assuming he was managing all of my savings, but he did not know about the other account, the one that truly held our life's fortune. "Robert and I said, my voice filled with a quiet pride, spent a lifetime building this family, and we built it on the foundation of independence. We saved for the day when we would need it most. That day has come, but not in the way you assumed." Mr. Harrison then handed the new will to David and Sarah. I watched their eyes as they read the first paragraph, their faces turning from shock to a pale, sickening green. I had bequeathed the entirety of my estate, including the house they were trying to sell, not to them, but to a foundation dedicated to helping elderly people maintain their independence, and to my dear friend and neighbor, Eleanor. A small portion was left to Lily, who, despite her silence, I knew was not of her parents' character. David and Sarah were left with nothing. "What is this?" David gasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This cannot be real." "It is very real, David," Mr. Harrison said, his voice firm. "Mrs. Vance signed it a week ago." I then pulled out a folded newspaper from my pocket. It was the latest edition of the local paper. On the front page, under a banner headline, was a picture of my new house, a beautiful, sprawling ranch-style home with a bright, welcoming garden. I had purchased it using my secret funds and had arranged for the newspaper to run a feature story about my new life. The title of the article was "Local Matriarch Finds New Home and a New Lease on Life." David's jaw dropped. Sarah's face was a study in horror. Their scheme had failed, and now they were not only left with nothing, but they were also publicly humiliated. The shame was palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud that hung in the air. As the crowd dispersed, I looked at David and Sarah, their faces etched with disbelief and bitter disappointment. They had tried to take my life from me, and in their greed, they had lost everything. I turned and walked away, not toward a new house, but toward a new life. The door of the house I had built was now a symbol of my freedom, and as I walked out, I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in years. I had not only saved myself, but I had also shown my son what a real burden was, not an old woman trying to live her life, but the greed and selfishness that had consumed him and his wife. I was free, and I was finally home.